picture this. It is May 20th, 2010. The city of light, Paris, is fast asleep, wrapped in a deep, quiet blanket of night. But while everyone else is dreaming, there is a shadow moving. A shadow that does not belong on the ground. 50 feet up, clinging to the weathered limestone of the Paris Museum of Modern Art, is a man. No ropes, no harness. No high-tech gadgets to catch him if he slips. Just bare skin against cold stone, and 10 fingers finding cracks that shouldn't even be there. Take a second and really put yourself in his shoes. Imagine looking down and seeing nothing but the black abyss of the street below, where the concrete is just waiting for a single mistake. The wind is whipping off the Seine River, biting into his neck, but his forehead is soaked in sweat. This is Vjeran Tomic. The world knows him as Le Spiderman, and for a good reason. For Tomic, this isn't just a break-in. It is a dance with gravity, a high-stakes bet where the only thing on the table is his life. Third floor now. His right hand reaches up, blind, searching for a narrow ledge. His fingertips are raw, swollen, and burning from the friction, but they are more sensitive than any sensor money can buy. He is not rushing. In Tomic's world, speed is what gets you killed. He takes a breath, slow and steady, trying to sync his heartbeat with the silence of the city. He can hear his own pulse thumping in his ears like a heavy drum, a constant reminder that he is still alive, for now. Fourth floor. The stone here is old, crumbling under the weight of a century. He taps a section, listening for that hollow ring that tells him it is about to give way. A tiny pebble breaks loose and falls. He watches it vanish into the dark, never hearing it hit the ground. One wrong move, one loose brick, and that is it. Lights out. But Tomic has been here 100 times before. He doesn't see fear. He just sees a map of nicks and grooves leading him to the top. Finally, the 5th floor. The target window is right there. And here is the kicker, it has been broken for 3 whole months. Security knew about it, management knew about it, but nobody bothered to fix the latch. Budget cuts, red tape, just plain old human laziness. It is funny, isn't it? We build these fortresses for our history, but we forget to lock the back door. Tomic slides through the gap, his feet hitting the gallery floor with the softest thud, as quiet as a ghost entering a cathedral. Inside, the silence is heavy. It feels like the room is holding its breath. The faint glow of the streetlights peeks through the glass, hitting the gold frames of the masterpieces lined up like soldiers. Tomic is standing in the presence of legends. Picasso, Matisse, Modigliani. These are works that survived world wars, Nazi occupations, and revolutions. And now, they are sitting in the dark with a man who just climbed up from the shadows. $100 million. That is what is on the line tonight. But you have to understand, Tomic isn't just some lucky thief who caught a break. This whole thing was a masterpiece of planning, executed with the help of someone you would never, ever suspect. So, stick around, because the story of how a poor kid became the most wanted climber in France is just as insane as the heist itself. And trust me, what happens to these paintings is going to haunt you. To really understand why a man would risk it all, hanging by his fingernails, 20 meters above the pavement in the dead of night, we have to pull back the curtain on his past. Forget the stolen millions for a second. Forget the empty frames. We need to go back to the Paris of 1968. That is the year Vjeran Tomic was born. He wasn't born into a life of luxury, and he wasn't part of some legendary crime family. His parents were immigrants from Croatia and Serbia, people who came to France with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a dream of building something better with their own 2 hands. They were honest, hard-working people. They clocked in every day to make sure there was bread on the table and a roof over their heads. Tomic grew up in a modest neighborhood where the other kids were obsessed with soccer, chasing a ball through the dusty streets. But even at 10 years old, Tomic was different. See, while everyone else was looking at the world horizontally, focusing on the streets and the shop windows, Tomic was looking at it vertically. He wasn't interested in what was happening at his feet. He was looking up. He was looking at the ancient trees in the park, the jagged edges of old apartment buildings, and the slate-gray rooftops that define the Paris skyline. To most people, architecture is just a bunch of cold, lifeless stone. But to Tomic, those buildings were an invitation. While other kids were learning how to run, Tomic was learning how to grip. While they were learning how to kick a ball, he was learning how to balance on that razor-thin line between life and death. There is a story he still tells today with a certain glint in his eye. It was the first time he scaled a 5-story apartment building in his neighborhood. All just to get a ball that had been kicked onto the roof. No gear, no help, just a 10-year-old kid with skinny fingers feeling his way through the cracks in the stone. When he reached the top and stood on that roof, he didn't feel a shred of fear. Instead, he felt a sense of total, absolute freedom. Below him was the world of rules, the world of adults worrying about bills and work. But up there, it was just him, the sky, and the silence of the stars. His parents were absolutely terrified when they found out about his little habit. His mother cried, his father yelled, and they begged him to stop. They told him he was dancing with the Reaper, that one day he would fall and that would be the end of it. But you know how it is. Once a kid has tasted the air at the top of the world, the ground starts to feel a little too small and a little too suffocating. He couldn't stop. Climbing wasn't a hobby for him, it was his identity. It was the only time he felt truly alive. By the time he hit his 20s, Tomic had turned the entire city of Paris into his personal playground. When the sun went down, he became a ghost haunting the rooftops. He climbed modern glass office towers, moss-covered historical monuments, and the iron bridges spanning the Seine. He became a legend in the underground circles of urban climbers, the guys who started the whole Parker movement. Before it even had a name, in those circles, the name Tomic was spoken with a mix of respect and genuine awe. They called him the man who never falls, the guy who could find a handhold on a surface that looked as smooth as glass. But here is the thing you have to understand. For years, Tomic wasn't climbing to steal anything. He was climbing because he was obsessed with pushing his own limits. He was looking for a perspective that no regular person could ever have. He loved the feeling of touching statues and gargoyles on the tops of cathedrals. The tiny artistic details that had been carved 100 years ago, and then forgotten, because they were too high for human eyes to see. But life has a funny way of taking a dark turn. An extraordinary skill, when placed in a soul without a compass, usually finds trouble sooner or later. In 1995, at the age of 26, Tomic found himself standing on a 5th-floor balcony in the heart of Paris. This time, he wasn't looking at the stars. He was looking through an unlocked door into an empty apartment. That was the moment his passion for the climb collided with the temptation of the world below, and that was the exact second our Spider-Man stepped into the shadows, starting a journey that would make him the most wanted art thief in the history of France. Paris, 1995. Let us take a trip back to the exact moment everything changed. Vjeran Tomic is 2006 years old. He is standing on a tiny balcony, 5 stories up, overlooking one of the most expensive streets in the city. The night air is cool, and the lights of Paris are twinkling below him like a field of diamonds. But Tomic isn't there for the view. He has just committed his very first break-in. He slips inside through a balcony door that was left unlocked, his bare feet hitting the thick, expensive carpet without making a sound. In the shadows, he spots a gold bracelet sitting on a vanity. He picks it up. Now, here is the thing you need to understand. He didn't do it because he was broke, and he didn't do it out of simple greed. In that moment, the rush of total control was what set his blood on fire. He had just proven a brutal truth about modern society. The higher up people live, the more they let their guard down. Think about it for a second. We spend thousands of dollars on heavy steel deadbolts. We put cameras at every entrance, and we hire muscular guards to stand watch in the lobby. We lock our front doors with 3 different codes. But we leave the 5th floor balcony wide open because we assume nobody can reach it. It is a fatal flaw in the way we think. We build fortresses to keep out the people walking the streets, but we have no defense against someone who knows how to fly. To Tomic, height wasn't a barrier, it was a highway. Those rough stone walls of Parisian architecture, with their ledges, their carvings, and their wrought iron railings, were nothing more than a staircase leading straight into the heart of someone's private life. The moment he took that bracelet, his entire concept of security crumbled. He realized that the safety the wealthy feel is actually just an illusion, a lie they tell themselves born out of a mix of arrogance and laziness. For the next 2 decades, Tomic sharpened his skills into a dark art form. He wasn't just a thief anymore. He was a phantom drifting through the most elite neighborhoods in Paris. He targeted the 16th arrondissement, where the richest families lived. The police started noticing a pattern they couldn't explain. No signs of forced entry, no broken glass, and not a single alarm tripped. Just priceless jewelry vanishing into thin air in the middle of the night. The people of Paris began to live in a state of constant anxiety. The feeling of having your private space invaded by someone who can scale walls like a spider is far more terrifying than just losing money. It felt like a personal insult to their belief in privacy. The police gave him the nickname Le Spiderman, not just because of the climbing, but because of the way he wove a web of fear over the high floors of the city. Tomic was caught a few times and spent some time behind bars. But no wall could ever really hold the soul of a man who was used to conquering the sky. By 2010, at 41 years old, he hadn't slowed down a bit. While most thieves his age were retiring or moving on to easier, less risky scams, Tomic was at the absolute top of his game. His muscles were like granite, and his nerves were steadier than a surgeon's. But this time, his target wasn't a private apartment anymore. His confidence had grown into something much more dangerous. A museum, a treasure chest filled with hundreds of millions of dollars in art. When a man who despises the rules of security meets a target filled with massive holes, a cultural disaster is bound to happen. Tomic had no idea that his next move wouldn't just put him in the history books of crime, but would send some of the world's greatest masterpieces on a one-way trip to nowhere. 6 months before that fateful night at the museum, a secret meeting took place that would forever change the history of art in France. I want you to picture a small, dimly lit cafe tucked away in a quiet Paris alley, where the smell of strong espresso mixes with cigarette smoke and the low hum of a conspiracy. 3 men are sitting around a small table in the far corner. Now, these guys don't look like Hollywood criminals with masks or high-tech gear. They look like average guys you'd pass on the street without a second thought. But this, right here, was the ultimate alliance of traitors. The first man at the table is Jonathan Byrne. On paper, he's an art dealer with a decent reputation, but in reality, he is a high-stakes broker for the underworld. Byrne is the kind of guy who can put a price tag on a human soul and always knows where to find someone with a bottomless bank account and 0 morals. The second man is our hero of the shadows, Vjeran Tomic. And then there is the third man, the most important piece of this puzzle, Jean Mitchell Corves. And this is where the irony hits you like a freight train. Corves wasn't a thief. He was a security guard at the Paris Museum of Modern Art. His one and only job was to protect these masterpieces from guys like Tomic. And yet, here he was, sitting in the dark, ready to sell out the very thing he was paid to guard. In the flickering light of that cafe, Corves began to reveal the shameful secrets of the museum. He wasn't talking about fancy laser grids or unhackable codes. Instead, he was talking about human laziness and red tape. First, he mentions that window on the 5th floor. The latch had been broken for 3 whole months. Think about that for a second. The museum management knew about it, but they hadn't fixed it because of bureaucratic paperwork and budget delays. Can you believe that? A building holding hundreds of millions of dollars in art was left wide open because someone hadn't signed the right form yet. Next, he moves on to the alarm system. It had been acting up for weeks, basically becoming an expensive, useless decoration on the wall. Half the security cameras were down for maintenance, and the other half had massive blind spots that only an insider like Corves would ever know about. He even handed over the patrol schedules of his coworkers, pointing out the exact gaps where the museum would be completely unguarded. At this point, this wasn't even a heist anymore. It was a guided tour, and the guide was the man who held the keys to the castle. Tomic sat there, listening with a terrifying kind of calm. He wasn't looking at the million-dollar price tags. He was looking at the holes in human integrity. This twisted bond between a skilled thief and a greedy guardian created the perfect plan. They shook hands, a deal sealed by the betrayal of culture itself. Byrne promised a massive payday, Corvus dreamed of a life of luxury, and Tomic, well, maybe he just wanted to prove one more time that no wall was truly high enough to keep him out. But there was one thing none of them considered in this game of shadows. They forgot the actual value of what they were about to take. Art isn't just money. It is the breath of history, and when you try to steal that breath with a heart full of greed, destiny has a funny way of hitting back when you least expect it. This alliance was built on sand, and the moment the tide came in, they wouldn't just be betraying the museum. They would start betraying each other. 2:51 a.m. Vjeran Tomic stands frozen in the heart of the Paris Museum of Modern Art. The world outside, the biting wind off the Seine, the rough stone walls he just scaled, all of that feels like a lifetime ago. Now, he is wrapped in a silence so thick you could cut it with a knife. The air smells of old linseed oil, polished wood, and the heavy, dusty scent of time itself. In the dim amber glow of the emergency lights, these priceless masterpieces are watching him. They are the silent ghosts of art history, staring him down. At this moment, the Spider-Man isn't climbing buildings anymore. He is climbing the scaffolding of destiny. Right in front of him is Le Pigeon aux Petits Pois by Pablo Picasso, a cubist masterpiece born in 1911, worth an estimated 23 million euros. Take a beat and really think about what that means. This canvas survived 2 world wars. It survived the rise and fall of empires and the brutal Nazi occupation of Paris. It has been guarded by the most sophisticated climate control and security systems money can buy. And now, it's standing face to face with a man who has one goal: to rip it out of the timeline. Tomic reaches into his pocket and pulls out a tool. Now, you might be imagining a high-tech laser cutter or some fancy gadget from a Hollywood heist movie. But the reality is much more chilling. It's a common kitchen knife. The kind of cheap blade you'd buy at a hardware store for a couple of bucks to slice bread. There is a brutal, painful irony in that. A piece of junk is about to be used to perform surgery on a piece of human soul. Tomic presses the tip of the blade against the inner edge of the frame, right where the canvas has been stretched tight for over a century. He pushes. There's a soft, rhythmic zip sound. In the absolute dead silence of the gallery, it sounds like a thunderclap. That isn't just fabric tearing. That is the sound of history's heartbeat being cut open. Tomic works with a precision that is terrifyingly calm. He can feel the tension in the fibers as they surrender to the steel. Inch by inch, Picasso's vision is being separated from its golden cage. When the final corner gives way, the painting falls. Tomic catches it with his bare hands. He feels the dry, brittle texture of the oil paint under his fingers, a weight that no amount of cash could ever truly measure. He rolls it up. Not too tight, because he doesn't want to crack 100 years of genius, but tight enough to tuck under his arm. Then, he moves to the next one, La Pastorale by Henry Matisse. A defining work of Fauvism, a treasure every museum on the planet would kill to display. The kitchen knife goes back to work. Zip, zip, zip. The sound echoes through the empty room. In this moment, Tomic doesn't feel like a common thief. He feels like a surgeon extracting the world's memories. Then comes Georges Braque. Then Amedeo Modigliani. Then Fernand Léger. 5 paintings. 5 masterpieces. Over $100 million in value. 15 minutes. That is all it took to turn a fortress of art into a hall of ghosts. Every time a canvas comes down, the room feels strangely hollow. The ornate gold frames are still hanging there, proud and perfect, but they are empty. They look like eyes without pupils, staring back at the total failure of modern security. For a split second, Tomic stands in the middle of the room, surrounded by those 5 empty rectangles. A flicker of guilt crosses his mind, a strange, dark empathy for the artists who have long since passed away. He knows he has done something that can never be undone. He hasn't just stolen valuable paper. He has stolen the breath of French culture. Those 15 minutes changed his life forever. But they also left a scar on the heart of Paris that would never truly heal. The Spider-Man takes one last look at the hollow frames before turning back into the shadows, carrying the weight of the masters toward a destiny that even he couldn't see coming. 5 priceless masterpieces are now tucked under Vjeran Tomic's arm. 100 million euros. a number that could flip 1,000 lives upside down, but right now, it's just a bulky, awkward weight. Tomic begins the long walk back through the museum's dark corridors. Everything seems to be going according to plan. He passes the security desk on the 3rd floor. Jean Mitchell Corves, the inside man, is sitting there reading a newspaper. He doesn't look up. He doesn't see a thing. Or at least, he's doing a hell of a job pretending not to. A guilty, silent conspiracy in action. But just as Tomic approaches the stairwell to the 5th floor, his heart skips a beat. Footsteps. Not one person, but two. The sound of muffled chatter and a light laugh echoes from the stairs ahead. This isn't Corves. This is an unscheduled patrol. He's got 30 seconds, maybe less, before they turn the corner. Tomic looks around. It's a long hallway lined with paintings on both sides. No alcoves, no curtains, nowhere to hide. Those 5 rolled-up canvases under his arm feel massive and obvious, like neon signs pointing right at him. In that life-or-death moment, his Night Stalker instincts kick in. Tomic darts into a side gallery, pressing his back against the wall behind a massive stone sculpture. He holds his breath, lungs burning. The footsteps get louder, the heavy thud of boots on the dry hardwood floor, sounding like a countdown to his own execution. The guards' flashlights sweep across the walls, white beams of light cutting through the dark, passing within 5 feet of where he's frozen. One guard suddenly stops. He shines his light directly onto the spot where the Picasso used to be. The empty gold frame glows under the beam, hollow and accusing. Tomic's heart is pounding so hard he thinks it's going to burst through his ribs. This is it. It's over. But then, the guard just shrugs. He says something to his partner, they both chuckle, and they keep walking. Maybe he thought the painting was out for cleaning. Or maybe, he was just too tired to care. Sometimes, human indifference is a criminal's best friend. Only when the footsteps fade into total silence does Tomic dare to breathe. He doesn't waste another second. He lunges for that 5th floor window. The broken one still hanging open like a gateway to heaven. But the real nightmare was just starting. Climbing up was hard enough. Climbing down with $100 million in art under one arm. That is a whole different level of crazy. One hand for the stone, one arm for the art. His center of gravity is completely shot. Niche by niche, Tomic feels for his old handholds in the dark. The night wind picks up, trying to peel him off the wall. Sweat pours into his eyes, blurring his vision. One slip, one cramp. And not only is Tomic dead, but Picasso and Matisse are going to be nothing but colorful smears on the concrete below. But with a freakish level of focus, he does it. His boots hit the Paris sidewalk, hard and cold. He takes one last look back at the museum. It stands there, silent and dignified, completely unaware that its soul has been snatched away. Tomic walks fast, disappearing into the veins of the city. The perfect heist is complete. But what he doesn't know yet is that the hardest part wasn't taking the paintings. It's trying to survive the crushing weight of having them. 7 a.m., May 20th, 2010. A security guard walks into the main gallery of the Paris Museum of Modern Art for his morning rounds. He stops dead in his tracks. One empty frame, then 2, 3. By the 5th one, the cold, hard reality hits him like a punch to the gut. 5 masterpieces by Picasso, Matisse, Modigliani, Braque, and Ledger have vanished off the face of the earth. Within hours, the news explodes across every major headline on the planet. This is the biggest art heist in French history. Interpol is on high alert. Borders are locked down. The entire global art world holds its collective breath. Meanwhile, Vjeran Tomic hands over the bag to Jonathan Byrne, the middleman who orchestrated the whole thing. Tomic did his part, an incredible, gravity-defying climb to secure a fortune. But this is where the real tragedy begins. You see, these paintings aren't gold bars or stacks of cash. They are the souls of humanity. They are too famous, too legendary, and now, they are way too hot to handle. Every museum, gallery, and auction house from New York to Tokyo has their eyes glued to this stolen list. Jonathan Byrne quickly realizes a devastating truth. 5 paintings worth 100 million euros are now just 5 useless pieces of paper that could put him in a cage for the rest of his life. His mysterious client vanished into thin air the second the news hit the airwaves. He tries to reach out to his underworld contacts, but everyone hangs up on him. Nobody wants to touch the masterpieces the whole world is hunting for. In the blink of an eye, those treasures turned into a death warrant sitting right in his living room. Panic starts to eat Byrne alive. He isn't a warrior or a thrill-seeker like Tomic. He's just a coward blinded by greed. Every police siren on the street, every footstep in the hallway makes him shake. He looks into the eyes of the woman in the Modigliani portrait, at the jagged shapes of the Picasso, and he doesn't see art anymore. He just sees fear. He needs them gone now, at any cost. And then, he makes a decision that art history will never, ever forgive. An act of stupidity, so profound it's hard to wrap your head around it. Jonathan Byrne rolls up those 5 masterpieces and stuffs them into a cheap, black trash bag. He slips out into the night, walks up to a dumpster on the street, and tosses them in. Right there, among the rotting food, the city's filth, and the household waste, he threw 100 million euros into the void. He disposed of the sweat, blood, and breath of geniuses like they were nothing but scrap metal. The next morning, the garbage truck crushed it all. Canvas from 1905, oil paint that had witnessed 2 world wars, all ground up and mixed with the trash of Paris. They are gone forever. When the police finally caught all 3 men in 2011, Tomic actually cried. Not because of the 8-year prison sentence waiting for him, but because he knew his dance on the stone walls had ended in a landfill. A perfect heist was destroyed by the sheer mediocrity of a hollow soul. Those paintings were never recovered, and Paris will forever carry a hole in its heart that can never be filled. In 2017, the final gavel fell in a Paris courtroom. Vjeran Tomic was handed 8 years. Jonathan Byrne and the crooked guard got 6. Justice was served on paper, but inside the galleries of the Museum of Modern Art, justice still feels cold. The empty frames from that night have long since been filled with other works, but the souls of Picasso and Matisse are gone, ground into the dust of a nameless landfill. Today, Tomic walks the streets of Paris as a free man. He still looks up at the rooftops, but he'll never find that absolute sense of freedom again. His real tragedy isn't the time he served, it's the ghost he carries. He has to live with the knowledge that his extraordinary talent was traded for nothing. Wasted by the cowardice of a man who couldn't handle the heat. This story leaves us with a bitter truth when rare skill meets common greed. It doesn't just ruin lives, it crushes the very breath of our shared history. If this story hit home for you, hit the like button and subscribe to Sins and Lesson. Join us as we dive deep into the shadows of human nature and the heavy prices paid for our mistakes. Thanks for watching.